to have access to the recording, I will make that available. I need to kind of check to see first of how we would sort of put that. I don't know if we would put that necessarily on our website or if we would go on our YouTube channel, but I definitely would want to make sure that this would be readily available for students to access after today's workshop. But thank you for joining. My name is Francesca Teixeira, and I am an advisor in the Lurie Student Success Center. And hopefully everybody here tonight is in the right place. But tonight is basically part one of a two-part series. And the title is Thriving at SJSU as an Adult Learner. This is the part one. The main goal of tonight is to talk about how to navigate the four-year system. Sorry, that's more so the discussion point for tonight. I didn't put that on here. But essentially, I'll share a little bit about what the agenda will look like for today. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next screen. So I'll share a little bit about how tonight will go. Hopefully we'll keep you here for about 45 minutes. But I'll share a little bit about who I am and kind of how I'm tied to this topic. You might look at me and just be like, well, how are you tied to adult learners? Adult learners is very near and dear to my heart. And I think it'll all make sense here shortly when I talk a little bit about my personal experience. And then I'll also talk a little bit about some existing research on adult learners in higher education. So hopefully if you're watching this, you identify as an adult learner. An adult learner, just so people are aware, adult learner is sometimes used interchangeably with a non-traditional student. Some people may refer to themselves as a non-traditional student, or they may refer to themselves as an adult learner. There's some, just talking to people, there's some stigma around the word non-traditional. So that's why a little bit more inclusive language is using the word adult learner. So an adult learner can include many, many different characteristics of students, which I'll share in a little bit. And then I'll talk a little bit about some strategies. So that's sort of what the whole purpose of tonight is to talk a little bit about strategies for navigating SJSU. And I'm basically talking about these things in terms of my experience with working with students, both at SJSU and also at my previous institution, which I'll share a little bit. I'll share a little bit later. And then also to just to sort of preface what part two will be. Part two is a sort of there's a second part to this workshop, which will be a career readiness workshop. So more so once you sort of get information on how to sort of navigate your time and your studies here at SJSU, many students have the idea of, okay, well, what's next? What's after, I'm maybe you only initially thought of getting your BA and now you're thinking of, I want to go and get my master's. I want to go and get my credential. Or maybe that was something you weren't initially open to, but now you're really looking at that idea. So really to kind of think about, well, what opportunities do you have being an adult learner and post-graduation opportunities? So I'll talk a little bit about what part two will look like. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself and kind of how I'm tied to working with adult learners. Again, people look at me and are like, well, how are you working? How do you work with adult learners? And a lot of it actually kind of came into maybe within the last 10 years. It's not something that I've always done. And I'll kind of share how that history here shortly. So I am an advisor. I currently advise students in Lurie College. I started at SJSU a little over a year ago. My background is I was an advisor previously at San Francisco State. prior to me working at San Jose State. So just a little bit about me, what I do at the Lurie Student Success Center. I'm the graduation and retention specialist for the college. So I mainly support students who are on academic probation. So you may have, you may have worked with me before, you may have not. But usually for students who are on academic probation, those students typically see me. I also support students who have been disqualified, academically disqualified from the university. So again, if you haven't been disqualified, you probably are not familiar with working with me. But those are the main two student groups that I work with, probation and academically disqualified students. I do also do general advising in the college. So if you have questions about whether you're on track for graduation, if you have questions about your class schedule, policies, procedures, I definitely can support you in that way. So, if you're just looking to get some general advising, I definitely encourage you to utilize me as a support in that way if you are looking for an advisor. I know some of you may be coming from different programs, such as I know there may be some folks watching this from the Interdisciplinary Studies BA program, in which case Caroline Oyang is your advisor. So, definitely if you are interested in speaking with me further, I'm very much available, even if you are not necessarily assigned to me. I'm always interested in talking to students, regardless of wherever you fall. And if I can help you in your own journey, I definitely want you to utilize me as a support. But just a little bit about my educational background. So I originally grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I had moved out here to California when I graduated high school when I was 18 years old. So I've been out here in California a little more than 15 years. So I love it out here. I love the fact that I don't have to go back home and shovel and deal with snow and all this stuff. It's great, and the humidity, it's really humid back on the East Coast. But I do miss it. I have my friends and I have family back there. But nonetheless, I am very much acclimated to California. I grew up, or I'm sorry, I didn't grow up. When I moved from Pennsylvania, I ended up moving to, I lived in Vallejo. So I went to Solano Community College, which was in Fairfield in the East Bay. And I was a transfer student. And even back when I was in community college, because people ask me all the time, well, when did you decide you wanted to be an advisor? And again, it wasn't until way later in my life, but I remember being in community college, and that's kind of where this interest in counseling kind of started. For all intents and purposes, I was a traditional age student, but at the same time, I was going through life transitions, moving from one coast, the East Coast, to the West Coast, and all of the identity things that I was going through at the time as an 18, 19-year-old young woman. I really didn't feel like I had people that I could turn to and I could talk to. My family, I just wasn't comfortable talking to them about certain things. So I really latched on to my community college advisor, and she sort of was that that reason that culminated into why I actually became a counselor, because I just felt like she was someone that I could just go to and talk to, not just about what's going on with school, but what's kind of going on in my life. She was an outlet for me to be able to vent in that way. I would often go to her office and just ask if I could just talk to her. Like, it didn't necessarily have to be an academic related question. I just wanted to be able to kind of go and talk to her about this dilemma that I was kind of going through, in my life. And she would, talk me out of it and give me some, really tangible advice and feedback. So that was sort of what sparked this interest in counseling, was having someone be human with me, being able to have someone talk to me and just have a conversation where it's not sort of all transactional. And many of you may have had experiences like that with advising, it being transactional. I've definitely have gone through, hearing student stories and students where they definitely don't feel their advisor is human with them, especially given if you are or have been in higher education as an adult learner. Sometimes those are added layers that sometimes that professionals, including professors, advisors, they don't know necessarily how to navigate. So you may be someone who has kind of feel like you've kind of fallen in the cracks of feeling like you've had support from folks in higher education. So again, that sort of ties to how and why I became a counselor. After I went to community college, I transferred to SF State. So I ended up getting my bachelor's and my master's at SF State. When I graduated with my bachelor's, I didn't, again, when I didn't come into this fruition that I wanted to be a counselor. I sort of was in a different direction. I wanted to be an activist. That's what I sort of wanted to do at the time. I wanted to be a community activist and really work within the LGBTQ community. And I had applied that was sort of the direction that I wanted to go in at the time. And I applied to go to grad school and I didn't get in. And it just sort of was like this awakening for me. Well, maybe this is not what I meant to do. And it just kind of gave me the opportunities to sort of figure things out, so to speak. So that's kind of where this interest of counseling really started to come. As I was continuing having communication and connections with my old advisor from community college. So this is why it's so important to have connections with folks at your institutions, even at your previous institutions, because you never know when you're going to need to reach out to them or ask them for advice. So yeah, in my instance, I continued my communication with my old advisor, and I just started kind of putting two and two together and just starting to think about, well, what would it look like necessarily if I decided to go and become a counselor? Like here was this person who was so vital to me in my life. What would that look like if I provided the same support to others? And that was sort of kind of what culminated to me to start kind of going in the direction of being a college counselor. So I ended up getting my master's at SF State in counseling. My background is in college and career counseling. So that's where the career also comes in. You'll hear me talk quite a bit about career because I feel like career and college go hand in hand. The whole reason you're in college is to have a career. Or for some of you, if you're an adult learner, maybe you are already in a career and you need the degree to sort of be that launching pad to that next step. That's the other layer that a lot of times people don't really understand, is from the adult learner's perspective, especially if they're in a career already and they need the degree in order to maybe launch that next step. Or maybe they feel stagnant. I have folks that have they've been in the same field for a long time and they want something different. They want that piece of paper. They want a degree in order to do something different. So there's very much different reasons why students end up getting a degree, especially for an adult learner. It may not necessarily be the same reasons as your 18-year-old, right? So through my experience at SF State, I started working. I did an internship with a program there. And this is kind of how it all tied into where my interest is now. But at SF State, I interned with a degree attainment program. So the program at SF State was called Advance. And it was a grant-funded program that focused on degree attainment for early childhood educators. So the students that I had worked with at SF State were full-time preschool teachers. Now, these were full-time preschool teachers, many of them at the time. Now, even though I worked at SF State, many of the teachers were still at the community college level. They were stuck at the community college level, taking GE classes and unable to pass certain GE classes to be able to get to the 4-year. However, one of the things that no matter, if it took some students 1 year or 2 years or 3 years to transfer, that drive and that determination was still the same. And as I was talking to some of these individuals, like some of the individuals I was talking to, these were people who were in the educational system for a very long time. And that might be someone like you. You may have been in the educational system, especially if you've maybe you've attended community college. Like I have students who taken community college classes upwards of 10, 15, 20 years. That might be you. Or you might have been someone you started in college and then you had a family, or you went to work. You had other obligations that kind of came into play in your life, and school had to take a back burner. So I was hearing a lot more stories, and I was meeting a lot more individuals like this. And kind of their characteristics were the same. They felt that their voice wasn't being heard in higher education. And here I am as a counselor intern, in my second year of grad school, and I'm really taking into account these stories, and I'm really taking into account, like, wow, like these are people who really need to be heard in higher education and really need to be able to be given an opportunity to excel, right? So once a lot of these students transferred, I felt that it was important, like, well, they still need well-rounded support. They felt like they were kind of getting left behind at the community college. God only knows what happens once they, come to a 4-year. And the 4-year is, as many of you probably know, the 4-year system looks a lot different than the 2-year system. And how to navigate that looks very, very different. So a lot of students, especially if you're an adult learner, and college and dealing with the things with higher ed, if that's not something that comes easy to you, a lot of students struggle. So one of the things for me is I wanted to be able to sort of be a liaison for students, especially adult learners who were coming from the community college over to the 4-year, and really help them navigate what is it like to be at the 4-year, because the policies, the procedures, how you register for classes, little things like that are so much different. And that's sort of what I did. That was what I focused I was an intern for that program for 2 years. I finished up my master's, and then I did my thesis on that program. I did a thesis. My master's thesis was assessing the experiences, needs, and supports of older students, because when I was working with the students at the advanced program, a lot of the students were over the age of 35. The majority of the students were over the age of 40. So these were educators who were working in the field for decades. I've had some early childhood educators who had been working in the field for 25, 30 years. So some of my students were in their 40s and their 50s. So I really focused on specifically older students, but older students are nonetheless included with adult learners. So that's what I focused my thesis on. And then I continued working for that program for 4 years after I graduated, because I just felt there was so much work that needed to be done. And I really still wanted to have a general understanding of what it's like working with adult learners, because it's not something that a lot of people come across. And I felt that as a new professional, when I had graduated with my master's, I just felt that it was a very unique student population, and it was a very unique skill set to have. And one of the things is when I decided I wanted to kind of move on and venture into something different at SJSU, I really held true to that. I really took that with me. The fact that I do have experience working with non-traditional adult learners, because not a lot of people do. And when you find people out there who do have that experience, definitely utilize them as a support, because they really understand, what does it take for you to be successful in this type of environment? And I've really prided myself on really understanding what the adult learner's experience is. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of how that ties into why it's important in terms of your own navigation, to be able to tell your story and share your experiences. So I kind of, in that, I talked a little bit about my personal experience. So I basically was working at the advanced, the SFC advanced program and working with adult learners. And this was just something that I really, even now, I'm still very much passionate about this. When I had the opportunity to present a workshop for this year, I went back to my roots. I went back to what was familiar with me, what I'm passionate about, and that's adult learners. I don't work with too much adult learners right now, just because of my role, because mainly I work, I work with undergrads, but our undergrads, and again, this has a lot to do with how the undergrad program, both the communicative disorders and the child development, not so much the interdisciplinary studies BA. I know there's a little bit more adult learners in that program. I mainly work with sort of traditional age students. So when I had the opportunity to do this, to create a workshop, like I said, I went right back to my roots, because there is a population out there, and many of you watching this are amongst that population of adult learners. And you deserve to have someone who hears you, who knows what your challenges and your struggles are, and really is there to kind of guide and help you. I'm not obviously the only one. There's others that work, within Lurie College that definitely recognize and want to help support adult learners. But for me, I just wanted to be able to present a workshop and just hear it from my perspective of, like, I've worked with dozens and hundreds of students, over the past 6 years doing this type of work. So I definitely have experience and know what it takes for an adult learner to be successful. So that's more so how I'm approaching this today. But if you have questions, again, if you want to kind of pick my brain or talk about your own situation and how to navigate, I'll definitely make sure to share my contact information with you. So here's some research on adult learners, and some of this stuff can be, I don't know how shocking some people might find this, but some of it it's shocking to who you talk to about it. It's not really shocking to me, but for some folks, especially if they're not familiar with working with adult learners, this can be pretty shocking. So the Lumina Foundation, which definitely they focus a lot on really looking outside of the box when working with certain communities. They report that, and this is pretty consistent across different research, about a third, so a little more than a third of all adult learners are over the age of 25. And that was essentially the sort of kind of what initially started my interest of working with sort of adult learners. Obviously, as you see with the second point, adult learners is broad. Adult learners doesn't necessarily mean you're an older student. But that was sort of when I first learned about what, like, when I first really started to understand what non-traditional older students, like, I didn't really have a clear understanding what an adult learner is. And a lot of people don't, because again, an adult learner, most people, when they're working in with colleges and universities, you're working with your traditional age student, which is 18 to 24. Anything over the age of 25, you're sort of considered this non-traditional adult learner. And it's just a higher yield of traditional age students that are in colleges and universities. I didn't put the statistic on here, but it was around like 90 some odd percent. It was around like 92% of students in colleges and universities are 18 to 24. So if you're over the age of 25, you're already kind of seeing that it's not that the support's not there, it's just that it's maybe not the full attention or full focus, right? So you're coming in with all of these layers, and how can you navigate with what's going on in your life and make it make sense for you being in school, right? So again, about a third of the students, or a little over a third of students, of adult learners are over the age of 25. More than a quarter are raising children. You may be a parent. The vast majority of students that I work with that are adult learners have children, and they don't have just one child. They have multiple children, and children of different ages, too. Some are, some have newborns, some have young toddlers, some have school age, some have teenagers, so understanding of how to balance being a parent, and especially if you have children that are in school themselves, trying to help them in school while, making sure that your school is, straight and all of that stuff too. It can be a challenge. And then more than half are working. I almost feel like that's not an accurate number. I would say that that's more probably about 3/4. But the vast majority of students, that I work with are working. And it's not just they're working full time. You might be working full time and trying to go to school full time or part time, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But you definitely are balancing and managing a lot of different roles and responsibilities and obligations. And again, looking at it from the, the higher ed perspective and the institution perspective, especially a four-year institution, and you may be running into this now, if, maybe you are running into class where there's not a lot of class availability. Maybe you can only take classes at a certain day or certain time, factoring in childcare, all of these other things, all of these other obligations and responsibilities, and you might be running into some roadblocks, into some challenges. That's real, and that's something that I feel like on a personal level, we don't talk enough about, even within our Lurie College. So, if that's someone like you, understand that I very much, empathize and recognize that. And I'm very much open to having conversations with you. If you're running into, I just don't feel like my needs, and this is what I'm running into, and I just want to be heard, and this is kind of my situation, and I'm really here, and ultimately everyone here is trying to get their degree. I understand that some institutions aren't necessarily designed for certain learners. So if you're someone that you feel like I really just want my degree, and I'm just running into all of these challenges, I'm willing to hear you out, and I'm willing to talk to you, and I am not afraid to talk to whoever I need to talk to, because, I understand that, this is a passion of mine. Not to go on a tangent, but this is probably something I do plan on getting a doctorate, and I most likely will be getting a doctorate in adult education, adult learning, and focusing my research on providing better support to adult learners in higher education. So I'm very much open and willing, if you want to have a conversation with me just about where your own trajectory and where you're at, definitely let me know. I'm very much open to having that conversation with you and maybe talking about some strategies. And then adult learners, they can be basically, as I had mentioned, it's pretty broad, it could be older students, baby boomers. You might be a millennial. You could be an adult learner if you're a millennial. Veterans, parents, career changers, English language learners, if English was not your first language. There's so many characteristics that make up an adult learner. So what's nice about that word or that phrase, adult learner, it's very inclusive. And unlike non-traditional student, it just sounds very harsh the tone sounds harsh. So I'm very mindful of the term adult learner, and I try to use that when speaking about anybody who kind of fits in these groups. And then also just the importance of just, trying to finish out school. I also understand that being an adult learner, you come with a lot of obligations, family, work, finances, and school, for many, is like is secondary. And I understand that, and I'm very much aware of that, as an advisor and as someone who, um, works with these types of students. However, I also have seen students leave the institution because of these items, and it's unfortunate because, a lot of folks are very close to getting their degree, and, for different reasons, they struggled in trying to kind of find a solution. And that's not to say that, some of that isn't justified where they have to leave. But ultimately having conversations with individuals about kind of what your challenges are, and seeing if there are some strategies and there's solutions, before you feel like you have to drop out. One of the nice things about SJSU is that you can take a leave of absence. A lot of students don't know that. So let's say, for example, you have something go on and you need to take some time off. SJSU actually allows you to take up to 4 semesters off without penalty. You need to obviously do a petition for that, but that's something that you can actually do instead of just kind of going AWOL, not letting anybody know your plans. You can actually, if you were in contact with an advisor, you can let them know, hey, the X, Y, and Z is going on in my life. I need to sort of take a break, but I want to come back. And it also makes you accountable too, right? If you actually do a formal leave of absence, right, that holds you accountable. That's holding you to saying, actually, I'm still invested and dedicated to my studies, and I actually do want to come back and I want to finish my degree, right? So there are ways out, if there are situations that arise where you just feel stuck. So this is why it's important to having relationships and talking to people that work, that and that work at the institution. So now I'm going to kind of just shift gears and talk a little bit about some strategies in navigating SJSU. And some of this stuff you may already be aware of, but I think it's also just to kind of keep in mind with, kind of, especially if you're a newer student to SJSU, if this is your first or second semester, you may still kind of be going through some of this. And I have students, that I've worked with in the past that they were in their last semester and they still feel like an imposter. So, just really understanding, and some of you may already know what imposter syndrome is, but imposter syndrome essentially is this perceived fraud. Like you're coming up, like you feel like you are a fraud. And this shows up in different aspects of people's lives. Like where you hear it a lot is in maybe in at like a job, or in school, or in certain situations where you feel like you don't necessarily belong, or you question why are you there, or your expertise or your knowledge. I know for me, being being a person of color, in for example, in a primary, maybe Caucasian space, I might feel like an imposter, something like that. That's an extreme example, but that's sort of kind of where I'm going at it with it. As an imposter, as an adult learner, you may see, wow, I'm in a class with 30 students, and I, or maybe me and one other person, are the only 2 students who, we look like we're over the age of 30. That's where you can be feeling like an imposter. It comes up in different aspects of people's lives. And those can obviously, bring up some feelings of anxiety for some folks. So, especially if you're feeling like I'm dealing with these feelings of imposter syndrome, understand that, other students, and everybody's experience is different, right? But remember that a lot of students also have feelings of imposter syndrome for their own reasons, right? So it may not necessarily be because you're an adult learner, but it may be because maybe, you know, English is not their first language, or maybe they're shy. You know, there's different reasons why people might feel like they're an imposter in certain situations. But in the sense that, you know, if you do feel like an imposter, you know, talk to people. That's where it's helpful to have conversations with an advisor, right? You know, this is where maybe you develop a relationship with your advisor and just like, hey, Francesca, like, you know, I'm in class and, you know, I just noticed like, man, I'm just like, I'm one of the oldest, like I'm one of the oldest ones in the class. Or maybe you notice other things, like maybe like I've had students come to me and just like, man, like I'm like one of the only ones that asks a lot of questions. It's like there's just something wrong with me, you know, little things like that. You know, if you're feeling like that, it's important to let it be known that you have those feelings, because what you wouldn't want to do is let those feelings continue invading you and really impact your ability to do well, you know. So definitely let people know if you're having some feelings of anxiety around being an imposter and what those feelings are stemming from. And sort of once you talk to others, you know, find your support network. You may notice that you might find people who look like you or may have similar may have a similar background or story as you. Or you know, it's been beautiful. You know, as one of the things is when I was working at SF State, you know, even though I had a lot of adult learners, we also had a lot of traditional age students too. And one of the beautiful things that I was able to see a lot of times was I was able to see this beautiful synergy, these two opposites come together. And in a way, because, you know, a lot of the adult learners, you know, some of them were older, some of them had, as I mentioned earlier, they had been working in the field for, you know, decades. And here we have some traditional age students who are 18, 19 years old. You know, they're babies, you know, they're very new to the field. So, or when I'm talking about the field, I'm talking about early childhood education. And just sort of the guidance and support and advice, and just sort of kind of creating a support system, right? And it's even though there's this big generational gap, right? You know, you're able to kind of rely and support on one another, right? The older students, you know, some of them they had struggles with technology. Working with computers is not like is not their strong suit. So this is where they would come and rely a little bit on like some of the traditional age students to kind of help with the tech aspect of it. On the vice versa, where you have some of the traditional age students where, you know, they may be having some struggles at work, right? They're going through some conflicts at work on how to navigate maybe a conflict with a coworker or a supervisor. This is where they would, you know, reach out to some of their older counterparts and they would ask them, hey, you know, I'm going through this situation at work. Do you have some advice or some guidance on how to navigate? So this is where that beautiful synergy comes into place, you know, but it's really important for you to kind of get outside of that comfort zone. You have to be able to talk to people, and be able to find comfort in knowing that, you know, people ultimately want to help each other. And especially in an environment like higher education in a classroom setting, you know, I think that's true more often than not. So I definitely encourage you, if you're someone who's kind of feeling like, man, I just would like to have, you know, more people who I can go to, you know, it takes time, but definitely, you know, look and see if you can find some folks, and, you know, try to see if that's a connection that you're willing to make. So I definitely encourage that. Find ways to relieve your stress. Obviously, you know, being a student, being an adult learner is stressful enough, you know, and then on top of that, all the obligations that you may have outside of school. So definitely, you know, self-care. You'll hear me talk about self-care a lot. I know self-care is hard for some folks when they do have other things going on, But, definitely make sure you emphasize and you do those things. And again, if that means you need to take some time off of school, this time off of school, I consider to be self-care, then definitely that's something you have the ability to do. Celebrate your accomplishments. So, when you get A's in your classes, when you get on the dean's list, celebrate that stuff. That's huge accomplishments. If you're in the first one of your family to get a BA, highlight those things, because those things are going to is what's going to help you finish, right? If you're getting A's on your exam, some people might find that cheesy, right? That you're like celebrating you got an A on an exam. That may not be important to someone else, but that's important to you, right? And if that means that that's going to help you finish and help you succeed and show that you can do it and that you're worthy of this, then do it. Who cares what other people think, right? So, definitely celebrate and note your accomplishments, because for many of you, I'm sure it was very difficult, to get here. So, any little accomplishment or achievement you make, celebrate that. And then practice self-assurance, knowing that you can do it, know that you belong here. I hear so many students tell me, maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this is not for me. And it breaks my heart every time I hear that, because you do belong here. There's a reason you are here. There's a reason you are at SJSU. It's obviously people have struggles, but it's important to let's try to focus on the strengths, right? I'm really someone who I want to focus on your strengths. What have you overcome? What is your story? What got you here? And what has made you thrive, right? Let's focus on that. Let's not focus so much on the negative. Let's not so much focus on, well, what if? Let's focus on the here and now, right? Let's focus on the things that got you to where you're at and how can you thrive and potentially overcome these things. So really try to practice self-assurance, knowing that you belong here, knowing that you can do it, knowing that you will do it. Those are the types of things that will help you succeed. Establish relationship. This is going to be really important. So kind of continuing what I was saying, tell your story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to tell people how you got to SJSU. I've had many students who've shared with me, like I just mentioned, like some students, I had a student who, she's in her master's now, God bless her. But she was in the community college 20 years. And I've had similar students like that, 15, 20 years. And how deflating that can be, especially if you're in the system for that long. And for some of those folks, once they transfer and get to the 4-year, they get their degree in 2 years, and it's very difficult. It can be very difficult. But really the powerful part of that is telling your story, letting people know that, hey, this was my story, right? And you having that appreciation, right? I have so much more appreciation for someone who told me they were in community college for 20 years, because I understand, I can't relate, but I can kind of understand their struggle, right? And I can see where that apprehension is, once they get to the 4-year, I can kind of envision it a little bit. So tell your story, because that's what's going to help people like me in order to give you like advice and make sure and reassure you that you can do it and that you can make it, right? And then in addition to that, tell people what you need, to be successful. Have an idea of what you want your short and long-term goals to be. And articulate those to folks, not just the folks within your institution, but in your inner circle too. Let your family and your friends know what you need, right? Because you do need support from your loved ones. You do need support from your coworkers. You do need support from your family. And they have to be able to understand what you're going through and what you're dealing with, especially for some of you, if you have kids, if you have a partner, they have to be able to meet you halfway. So very much tell people what you need, and don't be afraid to tell them multiple times, because sometimes you kind of have to hone it in. It can be rough for some people, especially like, again, if you're the first one in your family to be doing this, or if you're doing this after a long absence. Definitely hone in of why this is important to you and how this can help your inner circle, your family, your friends, coworkers, other folks that you know. And ask for recommendations, especially if you are thinking of going on to grad school. For some of you that may be, a little bit early, but, start to value and start to develop, make, not just utilize the connections that you already have, but, start to make, connections, especially at the institution, because again, if you are going to think about going, to grad school, you're going to need letters of recommendation. So this is where it's going to be helpful to develop relationships with your advisors. I've wrote dozens of letters of recommendation for students over the years. And that's just, me being human and having and developing relationships with folks, not just on the academic side, but on the personal side, right? So that's kind of, again, going back to telling your story. Don't be afraid to tell people your struggles and how you got here and where you want to go. Because again, that makes people appreciate you even more, and they want to help you even more. And then going into just sort of being a full-time versus a part-time student. Some of you may already know, like I have to be a part-time student. But just understanding that, being a part-time and a full-time student, can be some people go through the motions of that. If you are teetering between being a full-time and a part-time student, I definitely encourage you to talk to an advisor, because I support students on probation. This is sort of why I'm saying that. If you are someone who is working full-time, I'll just give you an example. If you work full-time, if you have a 40-hour-a-week job, let's say you're taking 4 classes, you have 3 kids, not to say that you can't be successful, right? But you really need to make sure you're self-disciplined, right? So, in some instances, for some folks, they just know that taking 4 classes is just not, they're not setting themselves up for success, right? So for some, that may only look like taking 2 classes at a time. I know for the interdisciplinary studies program, I know that is that's self-paid. So, I know the majority of folks are probably only taking 2 classes there a semester. So, definitely, if you are someone that's teetering with the time, and, think about all of that stuff, talk to people, talk to your family, make sure that if you are going to go from part-time to full-time, that it makes sense for you. Because what I would not want to happen is you go from part-time to full-time, and then you don't do well in the semester, you may end up on probation, and then you end up having to work with me. There's kind of things that can happen along the line if you're not successful in that way. So if you end up going from full-time to part-time, that looks a little bit different. Obviously, it's a little bit easier on folks. It's cheaper that way too. But usually one of the big things is if you go from from full-time to part-time, is understanding that it's going to take you a little longer to finish. So part-time students usually take about 3 to 4 years to finish, versus a full-time student. And I'm talking about for transfer, it's usually about 2 years if you're a full-time, 1.5 years, 2 years. But part-time is 3 to 4. So, I do have students who are like, I got to get a degree as soon as possible. If that's someone like you, then you may want to think about being a full-time versus part-time student. Money, same thing. If you're part-time, you're obviously it's going to take you more semesters to finish, and you're going to end up having to pay a little bit more money at the end. And availability of courses, we do have 2 undergraduate majors, child development and communicative disorders. I know we also have the interdisciplinary program too, but you also want to make sure that any classes that you're taking, or work with an advisor, because especially if you have to take classes in certain order, I know for communicative disorders, for example, you can only take classes, they only offer classes once a year. So if you miss out on one set of classes, you have to wait to the following year. So make sure you're just checking in. If you are someone, you are able to take time off of school, as I had mentioned, you can take one semester off without penalty. But anything longer than one semester, you would need to do a petition for. So if you are thinking of going between part-time versus full-time, I just suggest talking to an advisor and with your friends and family to make sure you have that support. And then just to wrap up, again, just tips for asking help. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help. You're all here to get a degree. Ultimately, my hope is that everybody here watching this workshop ends up getting their degree ultimately. So if you identify as an adult learner, don't be embarrassed to ask for help. I encourage you to ask for help and ask for help often. Ask questions. Professors, counselors, we're all here to help. Where you may run into is if, for example, some folks, you may run into some folks, and it shouldn't be that way, but you have some folks that, don't always mesh well with adult learners. If you do run into someone like that, definitely feel free to reach out to myself or any other contacts at the university that you have that you're comfortable talking to. I want to make sure that, if you are an adult learner, especially in Lurie College, that you have a really great experience and that you're in a productive learning environment. And if you feel that's not being made because you feel like you're an adult learner or you have all of these obligations or responsibilities, and you're just not feeling like you're being heard, feel free to reach out to me, to talk to me. And I'm happy to sort of strategize with you. I have no problem, talking to the powers that be about student concerns, and I can do it anonymously if you're, concerned about confidentiality. But I definitely, I am an advocate for making sure that adult learners have an inclusive learning experience. So if you feel like you're not getting that, please talk to me and I'm happy to sort of troubleshoot that with you. Set long-term and short-term goals, making sure that you know what you have to do and in the manner and the time frame that you have to do it in. Build a healthy support system. Build a team, encourage the people around you. Tell your friends and your family, you have to be getting support from those people. It's important, especially if you're a parent and you have a partner and kids, like you should be getting support from your partner. But when that support doesn't just mean emotional support, that means, tangible support too. When you have homework, when you have a quiz, making sure that person or those individuals understand and respect your time, right? If you haven't had those conversations, definitely have those conversations. Because ultimately, again, you want to be able to finish and be successful in your studies. And again, believe in yourself and believe in your abilities. Know that you're here for a reason. Know why you're here. Know that you're here to get your degree and keep that in the back of your mind. Once you start straying away from that, then you start to have self-doubt and you start to feel like, no, maybe I can't do this. So instead, really, really, really hone in on, I can do this. I know I'm meant to get my degree. Because ultimately, for many of you, maybe you do want to go on and get your master's. And, you need a bachelor's degree in order to get a master's degree in most instances. So definitely, if that's your ultimate goal, or, maybe to improve your job or to, get a raise or get a better career, if your BA is the ticket to that, definitely make sure you keep that as your top priority. So that's pretty much it for me. I'm just wrapping up here. Sorry, I said I was going to do 45 minutes. It just pretty much went to the hour. But I'm going to go ahead and just preview what part 2 is. So hopefully tonight was helpful for you and kind of getting some understanding of what does it mean to be an adult learner and how to navigate SJSU, and utilizing your voice and the people that work at SJSU in order to make sure that your needs are being met. So definitely don't hesitate to utilize and to start talking to people and letting folks know, hey, this is where I'm at and this is what I need in order to be successful. Part two, so if you were interested in part two will be on Thursday, November 18th. It will be at 6:00 p.m. on Zoom. So it'll be at the same link. You're able to register now on Spartan Connect if you already know that you're going to definitely attend. And what the next one is going to be is sort of what's next. So maybe you are going through your BA, and for some folks, I've talked to so many students, in my career that initially said that, Francesca, I only initially saw myself get the BA, that's it. They never saw anything beyond that. And, maybe as they went through their studies, as they, started to see, wow, I'm doing really well in school, or I actually see myself going and getting a master's, it starts to open up a lot more opportunity for them. And that may be you. You may have started initially thinking that I wasn't going to go get a master's. And I'm not telling you to go get a master's. For some folks, they're just fine with their BA. And if that's fine, if that's you, that's fine. But I know a lot of students they want to know, what else could I do? Or what's next after I get my BA? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That'll be part two. And then also too, what'll be really cool is I'm also having some alumni. So adult learner alumni. So folks that are related to this discussion. And I'm going to have them share a little bit about their journey and what they ended up doing. So you can kind of get some information from others in terms of what does it take? Here was a student that who was just like me, and they ended up getting their BA. Many of them ended up getting their master's, and here's what they're doing now. And just kind of hearing their story and finding out their trajectory a little bit. So hopefully you'll join us for part two. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My email, I didn't realize I didn't have a slide for my email. I will go ahead and I will put that. I'll just put that right here so folks can see it. But if you have any questions, or if you want to just talk to me and just kind of just pick my brain about just me, my experience with adult learners, please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I am more than happy to talk to you about my experience with adult learners, or give you some suggestions and advice if that's something that you may need. But I thank you very much for attending tonight. I hope this was really helpful for you, and I wish you the best of luck in all of your studies and your time at SJSU. Thank you and have a great evening.